What would you do if you saw someone destroy an elderly woman's livelihood right in front of your eyes? This is the story of a man who thought power meant everything, until a stranger reminded him what true strength really looks like. The afternoon rain fell softly on the cobblestones of Pike Place Market in downtown Seattle. The famous market district buzzed with its usual energy, tourists snapping photos, vendors calling out their daily specials, street musicians filling the air with melody. But tucked away near the corner of First Avenue, away from the main crowds, sat a woman who embodied quiet dignity. Margaret Chun had been coming to this spot for 3 years. Every Saturday and Sunday, she would carefully arrange her handmade items on a small folding table, knitted scarves in every color imaginable, delicate origami cranes strung into mobiles, and hand-painted greeting cards featuring Seattle's iconic landmarks. Each piece took hours to create in her small studio apartment, where she lived alone after her husband passed away. At 68 years old, Margaret didn't sell these crafts because she wanted to. She sold them because she had to. Her pension barely covered rent, and medical bills from her husband's final years had drained their savings. But she never complained. Instead, she smiled at every passerby, grateful for each dollar earned, each kind word shared. The commotion started when a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, parking illegally in the loading zone. Out stepped Derek Lawson, his expensive suit pristine despite the drizzle, his leather shoes clicking against the wet pavement with an air of entitlement. He was inspecting his newest acquisition, a historic building he'd purchased for redevelopment into luxury condos. Derek's eyes immediately fixed on Margaret's table, positioned just feet from his building's entrance. His face twisted with disgust. To him, she wasn't a person. She was an obstacle, a blemish on his vision of an upscale neighborhood. He approached her table with aggressive strides, his voice loud enough to turn heads. He informed her that this sidewalk now belonged to his property, and that her little poverty display was driving away his potential buyers. Margaret looked up, confused and frightened. She explained softly that she'd been selling here for years, that the city permit allowed street vendors on public sidewalks. But Derek didn't care about permits or laws. He cared about image. His face reddened with rage as he declared that someone like her, a relic of the neighborhood's undesirable past, had no place near his million-dollar development. What happened next made several onlookers gasp in horror. Derek reached across the table and swept his arm violently, sending Margaret's carefully crafted items flying into the rain-soaked gutter. Origami cranes scattered like fallen leaves. Knitted scarves landed in puddles. Painted cards smeared and tore as they hit the wet concrete. Margaret stood frozen, her hands trembling as she watched weeks of work destroyed in seconds. Tears welled behind her gold-rimmed glasses. She tried to speak, to protest, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Derek leaned in close, his words dripping with venom, calling her a street rat who should crawl back to whatever hole she came from. The small crowd that had gathered seemed paralyzed by the cruelty unfolding before them. Some held up phones, recording, but no one intervened. Derek noticed the cameras and laughed, declaring that he had lawyers who could crush any complaint she might file. He pulled out his wallet, threw a $20 bill at her feet with mocking generosity, and told her to use it to find somewhere else to infect with her presence. Margaret slowly bent down, her knees aching, trying to salvage what she could from the gutter. Her hand shook as she picked up a soggy origami crane, its delicate folds collapsing between her fingers. From the shadows of a nearby doorway emerged a figure most people passed without noticing. The homeless man had been sitting there for hours, and at first glance, he seemed like just another forgotten soul of the city streets. But his eyes held something different: recognition, and a fire that hadn't been there moments before. He stood up slowly, his military jacket bearing the weight of rain and memory. His weathered face was set with purpose as he walked directly toward the scene, his boots splashing through puddles. Derek was still gloating, checking his expensive watch when the man's shadow fell across him. The homeless man didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect before falling on hard times. He addressed Derek by name, which surprised everyone, including Derek himself. Then he asked a simple question. Did Derek know who he had just humiliated? Derek scoffed, dismissing the man with a wave, but the veteran didn't move. He turned to Margaret, his expression softening, and spoke directly to her. He called her Mrs. Chun. He asked if she remembered him, Tommy Rodriguez, from the VA hospital where she had volunteered for 15 years. The crowd's energy shifted. The veteran's voice grew stronger as he shared Margaret's story for all to hear. She had spent over a decade volunteering at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, sitting with dying soldiers who had no family, reading to them, holding their hands in their final moments. She had organized fundraisers, donated her own limited money to help veterans facing homelessness, and never once asked for recognition or thanks. Her late husband had been a Vietnam veteran, and after his death, she had made it her life's mission to honor his memory by caring for those who served. Tommy himself had been one of those veterans suicidal, broken, convinced the world had forgotten him. Margaret had visited him 3 times a week for 6 months, talked him back from the edge, helped him find purpose again. Derek's confident smirk began to fade. Other members of the crowd started speaking up. Someone recognized Margaret from a news article years ago about her volunteer work. Another person mentioned seeing her at a memorial service, laying flowers on graves of veterans with no living relatives. Tommy turned back to Derek, his voice now edged with steel. He explained that this street rat had more honor and dignity in her smallest finger than Derek had in his entire privileged existence. He pulled out his phone and showed Derek something, a screenshot. It was a social media post, already viral, showing Derek destroying Margaret's items, thousands of shares, hundreds of comments demanding his identification. Derek's face went pale. He stammered something about a misunderstanding, but his words fell flat. Tommy stepped closer, and though he never touched Derek, the developer stumbled backward as if physically pushed by the weight of his own shame. Within 24 hours, Derek Lawson's life had changed dramatically. His real estate firm dropped him as a partner after the video reached 2 million views. The city council, responding to public outcry, fast-tracked new protections for street vendors. And Margaret? A crowdfunding campaign organized by Tommy and other veterans raised over $100,000, enough to cover her living expenses and finally allow her to rest. But the money wasn't what mattered most to Margaret. It was the moment Tommy had stood up for her, the way the community had rallied, the reminder that kindness always finds a way to echo back. The lesson is simple but profound. Never judge someone's worth by their current circumstances. You never know who someone is, what battles they've fought, or how many lives they've touched. Treat everyone with respect and dignity, because karma has a perfect memory. So here's the question for you. Have you ever misjudged someone based on appearances? What would you do differently if given another chance? Think about it